Hi everybody, I am coming to you on the second hottest day of the year. Did I ask for summer? You know that expression, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. Okay, I've been giving thought to what some of you have requested, and that is a video talking a little bit about the spiritual side of me and the intuitive part of who I am. Because as with everybody, we are all a compilation of things that makes us the unique beings that we are. Anybody who knows me, and certainly those who have followed my path through the fun times and the not so fun times, are very much aware of the fact that I am a very spiritual person and very God-centered. Sorry, I was just looking at a message that came in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences in this realm. And if this is a topic that makes you uncomfortable or something you prefer not to hear about, just skip to my next video. For those of you who want to see it and want to hear about it, stay tuned. You know how when we're young we have to find our place in the world and we look for it in so many different ways. Our formative years are so important in developing the people we become. I was raised by parents who were not terribly young. My poor father was pursuing my mother for 12 years until he finally won that battle. So I have to give it to him for perseverance. And he adored her, and I think what a great gift that is to somebody to know that she was adored. Unfortunately, or sadly, from my mother's point of view, she had been in love with somebody else, which is why it took him 12 years. And I don't even remember if she was engaged to him, but she was deeply involved with somebody else for a long, long time and really wanted to marry him. He was a very intellectual man. I think he was an attorney, but I'm not certain now in retrospect. My father was a working man, but a man of great intelligence and great insight, as it turned out as well. So they were, they had to be in their 30s, early 30s at least, when they got married. And I was the second of 3 children. So my place in the family, I'm sure, had something to do with it. The fact that my parents were older, the fact that my mother worked alongside my father and was not home with me a lot in those early years, had a lot to do with who I was and who I was to become. And I'm sure all of that, and this is for those of you who understand what I'm about to say, was part of the reason I chose them to be there as my guides on this planet. So, when I was a little girl, I was actually in the hands of many other people. My mother worked. We had housekeepers, and I don't mean fancy housekeepers, people who took care of things and just were there while my mother worked. And sometimes, as happens with housekeepers, if one does not live a life like Dynasty or Dallas where one has a staff, sometimes they don't show up. When they don't show up, you have to make all kinds of contingency plans, especially for the littlest child, who at the time was me. So I was there, sometimes raised by the housekeepers, and sometimes My mother and father were there, and family was very important in my family, and it was stressed always. I wound up in the care of my Aunt Yetta a lot because she and my mother were very close. My mother was the oldest child, and Yetta was next. Then there were 6 siblings in that family, but only 4 survived. So it was my mother, Yetta, then their brother, Al, and the baby was Tilly. So Yetta lived not far away, and she and my mother were very, very close, always, all their lives. So Yetta took us a lot. She took me, she took Marty, and she was nothing less than super indulgent, which of course had its perks for us as children, but serious issues for us as human beings. There are lots of stories with that, but it's not part of this spiritual journey, so I'll leave it alone for now. So another person who was terribly close to me, and you know this because I've talked about him so many times before, was my uncle, Harry. Harry was a bachelor who played a ukulele, and he was just a loving, sweet, dear man who didn't hide his feelings. When he would come in the door, when I was old enough, he would slap his knees for me to jump up in his arms, which I did unfailingly, and he would give me a bear hug, and I remember them to this day. And the man died when I was 6, so you can imagine the impact he had on me. I often have thought of myself as showing or tapping into the spiritual side when he died, but I realized the other day that it had actually happened a lot sooner than that, because there were times when I was younger when I knew intuitively that if I was in a place that was extremely uncomfortable for me, or a place from which I wanted to leave, that all I had to do was concentrate and I would be transported somewhere else. The problem, of course, was it didn't work. And I was very frustrated with myself that it didn't work. But what it showed me as an adult looking back on it was that I had not left all the memories of my life in between lives. And again, please, any of you who don't like this kind of thing, just I would say tune out, because if I'm going to be honest, and you know it's the only way I know how to be, I have to tell you the whole story. So I felt a little bit strange and a little bit isolated because I felt different, and I felt much older than my age always, and as if I was tapping into something more than just what was going on in my immediate world. When I was 6 and when Harry died, I felt devastated. The next time I felt that devastated was when my father died, and I'll get to that. But when Harry died, I remember lying in bed with I was 6, I was a little girl. I would lie in bed with my feet up on the wall, and I kept saying, "How could you leave me? How could you leave me? I thought you loved me." I could cry now. I'm so touched by it. I didn't know then that it was not by choice, even though stories came out after Harry died very suddenly. And again, I don't recall whether he was 52 or 57. He was one or the other. But apparently a few days before he died, he was with someone, and he pointed to a chapel, I think. And he said, "I'm next." So he knew, again, intuitively, he knew. So it ran in the family, no question about it. And I used to talk to God all the time and say, how can I live in this world without Harry? I didn't know it was going to affect me like this. Wow. That's a lot of years ago. Okay. So I used to talk to God and I would say, I'm in so much pain. I don't want anybody else to ever feel this kind of pain. I was 6, and I knew that the pain I was feeling was so acute that I didn't want anybody else to suffer the pain that I was suffering. And I remember saying, how can I help? It seems silly now looking back on it, but I must have known there was something that could be done. And I started to get a lot of messages and started to really be tuned in on an intuitive level. In all fairness, my father always said that my mother was a witch, in the nicest sense of the word. And I, of course, always referred to her as a witch. And I would say, don't tell me anything, because I knew if she said it, it would be. So my mother had it. My mother just called it woman's intuition, but it was so deep and it was so right on. And then I found out that her mother had it before her. So I guess there is a genetic element to it, or souls gravitate to other souls of a similar nature. So I'm not sure which truth is the truth. So the years went by and some really strange things started to happen. In my 30s, I was having a spiritual reawakening. I was going through, I don't even remember exactly how it started, but there was some issues I was having and some psychological stuff and dealing with some issues in my marriage that were neither his fault nor mine, just were. I don't like me without my little highlight. So I started looking for answers. And in looking for answers, somebody had mentioned the book, no, that's not true. I think the very first book I read was Jess Stern. No, I could be out of sequence. In my early days of searching for answers, I came across somehow books about Edgar Cayce. There was, I think it was Tom Subaru's book. There was A River. I think I'm losing it, folks. But it was the story of Edgar Cayce's life, and I found it so fascinating. I mean, he was of my time. Unfortunately, he died, I believe it was 1946, so that was just a tiny bit too early for me. But how I would have loved to have known him or talked to him or had a reading by him or whatever. He was a very, very spiritual man who had to do this to help people. It was his mission in his life. And I read about Edgar Cayce, and then I started to branch out to other books. There was a rather well-known political reporter in Washington called Ruth Montgomery, who originally got into metaphysics, really to debunk it in the beginning. And she formed a relationship with Arthur Ford. You have to forgive me with the makeup and Tom Ford. I had to stop and think for a minute. Arthur Ford. And he was a medium, and what she was trying to do, again, was to debunk it. So she spent a great deal of time with him and watching what he did. And she, in the end, became such a believer and wrote many, many books on the subject. And they were all well written. They were well thought out and not fanciful at the time. So I started to branch out in all those directions, and I started to see things more and more. I think I had kept the door closed to it a lot because I didn't like what I was seeing, and I didn't want to be faced with that if I couldn't change it. So what happened was I started in the earlier days of it, I would have dreams, very vivid dreams. And in the dreams, I would be on a plane. I was always on the plane when it crashed. And it was a dreadful feeling. So I knew it from the vantage point of the people. I mean, I remember once I saw the AA on the plane, so I knew it was an American Airlines plane. Whenever I had one of those dreams, usually within a day or two, but within a very short period of time, there was the plane crash. I hated seeing those. I didn't want to see those because I couldn't change it. I couldn't make it go away. I couldn't make it better. And I hated the feeling of experiencing it, being on the plane in my dreams. But a lot of that started, and I've told you this story before, just a little bit, and I think I'm going to stop with this, and I'm going to have to do a second segment of this if you want more. When my father died, I was devastated. My father was a very strong man. He had a very strong constitution. He had heart problems and had heart problems much of my life. I think he had his first heart attack when he was still in his 30s, and he died just shy of his 60th birthday. And when he died, I was incredulous because, yes, he'd had heart attacks, but he would get better. And that was my expectation. So when he didn't, how could the world not have him in it? And that was also coupled with the fact that the day before he died on Christmas Eve. And the day before he died, he called. And first of all, that call or the call a day before, I forgot which one, he said, "Have I told you how much I love you?" I said, "No." That bothered me tremendously because my father, though I knew he loved me, was not demonstrative. He never said it. And I realized later he needed to get it said. He needed it said. And I guess I needed to hear it. I couldn't believe he was gone. He could not be not of this earth. How could I function? And I couldn't. For the longest time, I felt as if I was in a bubble. My world was black and white. Everybody else's world was technicolor. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. I started to get agoraphobia. I started to get it before that, actually. I did. I started to get that before that. Age, it sort of kills a little bit of the timeline. So forgive me for that. But for about a year, I found it very hard to function. I didn't function well. Then the dreams started, and they were visitations. There is nobody on this earth who will ever convince me otherwise. It was the most vivid experiences of my life, till then and since then. And it was many, many years ago, and it changed my life forevermore. He took me with him every night for 7 nights in a row. And he would greet me with a big smile on his face, and he would take my hand and he would show me where he was. My father was a nature lover. He always wanted to live on a farm. And he was there among the trees and the grass and flowers, and it was beautiful. And he would show me where he was and how happy he was and that everything was good. And at the end of the dream every night, I would say to him, "But you're dead." And he would say to me, "But I'm not." And then the next night he would come back. On the 7th night, when he came to me and we had that whole experience, I said to him at the end of the dream, "But you're dead." And he said, "Yes, I am." He never came back after that. I think he knew that completed my healing enough to be able to go on and to know that life did not end with the last breath that we take on this earth. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people to get. There are a lot of physicians or clinicians or scientists who will tell you it's not possible. Yet a lot of scientists and a lot of clinicians and a lot of physicians who have studied it over the years have been converts to it. So come to your own conclusions. I am not here to change anybody's mind or view on anything of this world or not of this world, but it has made a huge difference in my life. And that was only the beginning. But as I say, I'm going to stop here because this could be an hour-long video, and I will not do that to you, and I will not do that to me. So if you let me know in the comments when you see it that you want to see more of this kind of thing, let me know. I'm really happy to share it. As you know, my life is an open book. I have not shared it before because, in truth, I did not want to offend anybody and their belief system, because I respect everything that you're experiencing in your life, and I have to be true to what I experience. And this is my truth, and this is my reality. So that's just another part of who I am. Take care. I will see you soon. And as I say, you'll determine whether this is chapter 1 or the book. Take care. Bye-bye.